concrete. We run and struggle. Let's reach our dream together. We can. We are young together. Hey, yeah, hey, yeah, it's time to get up. Hold your hand, feel somebody. Let's take out this step together. One step to go. Great. Hey, yeah,
Good evening, everyone. My name is Micaela Milian from ESME Philippines, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Before we begin, if any of you have questions regarding the discussion, please don't hesitate to send them to us by entering it in the comments section of whatever social media platform you are watching this on, and I will be here to relay them to our guest speaker. Again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the live webinar series of ESME.ph, an e-learning marketplace for Filipino professionals where one can develop relevant and in-demand skills through master classes in different fields of learning. If you want to learn more about us, feel free to visit our page at www.esme or esme.ph. For those who are watching on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, feel free to share the link to this stream to people whom you think will be interested in today's topic. This webinar is in partnership with the ASEAN Youth Organization, an ASEAN-approved nonprofit organization that spreads awareness of the ASEAN to over 200 million young people in Southeast Asia. This webinar is also brought to you by the Rotary Club of Alabang Madrigal Business Park. So now, our topic for today is all about achieving success through failure. Nobel Prize-winning psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky share that people are so averse to failure because the effect of a loss is twice as great as the gain from a win. Failure has such a big impact on us negatively, which is why we will do anything to succeed. And while many people are afraid of failure, if there is anything people like Jack Ma of Alibaba and Jeff Bezos of Amazon have proven, it is that it is more than okay to fail, because failure is all part of the journey to success. Contrary to public opinion, according to Forbes, failure keeps one's ego in check, it inspires positive change, it gives one a new perspective on life, makes us more resilient, and lastly, it teaches us what we want and what we do not want. Ultimately, failure will lead us on the road to success, which our speaker will talk more about with us today. Our speaker is currently taking up a Bachelor of Science in Applied Corporate Management in Salle University. Previously, he was a talent acquisition intern for Willis Towers Watson. He has a lot of leadership experience as he is the Executive Vice President for Communications of the Business Management Society of DLSU. Before assuming that role, he had also been the vice president for promotions and assistant vice president for marketing and social civic of the same organization. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Jake Ong.
Hi, thank you, Mika, for that amazing introduction. Uh, yes, so I'm Jake Ong, and I'm really glad that I'm here today, and I'm really thankful for this opportunity to speak about success through failure.
We're glad to have you. So let's get the ball rolling, I think.
All right, should I jump through my presentation? All right. So, good day, everyone, and welcome to Success Through Failure. I am currently representing my organization, the Business Management Society, but first, let me introduce myself. Next slide, please. So, my name is Jake Ong, and I'm currently in my senior year taking up Applied Corporate Management in De La Salle University. I am also currently the Executive Vice President for Communications in my organization. And my current CGPA is 3.795. So I'm very near summa cum laude, but not quite there yet. And just for you all to know, I didn't place this CGPA here because I wanted to show off, but rather I wanted it here because I want you guys to know that I wasn't always a straight A type of student. And so that after this webinar, you guys will know how I got to this point from where I was before. However, I just want to say before I actually delve into this webinar, the contents here isn't some tried and tested formula to turn failure into success. But because I can't give you guys that because there's so many different ways to fail and there's many different ways to succeed as well. And obviously, I can't tell you guys that there's some key to success out there that'll help you become a multimillionaire because if I knew there was a key, I would be a multimillionaire myself. But rather, I'll simply be telling you about the different experiences that I've gained and about how the experiences that I have with the barriers that stop us from succeeding. And hopefully, you guys will be able to gain something out of that. All right, so I'll try to keep this talk short because I know exactly how short our attention spans are these days. And to begin with, I'll be telling you guys about my credentials, but not the credentials that I have here on this slide, but rather my credentials in failure, because that's what this webinar is all about. So let's proceed to the next slide. So some of my friends already know this, but back in high school, I was in no way a good student. I was absolutely terrible. I didn't get any grades above 90 at the time, and maybe you might think, hey, at least he got 75, which is the passing mark in our high school. But here's the thing. The only reason I got 75 was because whenever it was time for our grades to be given to us, the teachers would pull me aside and tell me that I'm about to fail. They'd give me additional work just so that I would pass, and they would make it extremely simple too. All I had to do to get a 75 in the class was to have complete notes. Now, I've never gotten the habit of note taking ever since I was in high school until now. So each time we were about to get our grades, I had to get the smartest kid's notebook and copy everything from the beginning. At the time, I still even found myself complaining too. Like, these teachers are gonna make me copy an entire notebook just so I can pass. Why don't they just make me pass? That's the type of student I was, and that's the type of mindset I had back in high school. In reality, these teachers were actually really kind because they didn't even give me any actual work. Like, it wasn't an assignment or anything, it was just copying notes. So that's the type of student I was. I wouldn't do any work, and I'd pass the day by just entertaining myself in class. Now, obviously, I didn't stay this way, otherwise, I wouldn't be here giving this talk. So let me tell you guys about some of the things that helped me change. Okay, let's proceed to the next slide. So the first thing is I had a change in my environment. Now, this might seem simple, but I believe that it was honestly the catalyst that helped me change. To give you all context, let me tell you guys what my environment was before. So I come from an Asian household. So there was definitely a lot of pressure coming from my parents to become that straight A type of student, which is understandable because no parents ever have a child and think, wow, I hope my child gives me barely passing grades. And but here's the thing. I was in high school, right? And I was also going through my rebellious phase. So each time they would actually make me go study, I couldn't say no, of course, these were my parents. But what I do is I'd pick up a book and I'd open it and I'll pretend that I'm studying. That way they think that they're winning by making me study, but in reality, we were both actually losing. In hindsight, of course, that wasn't a smart move for any of us. But at the time, it felt good to go against my parents. I was in my teenage years. But what changed all this actually was when I became close with a certain group of friends. You know how they say that you should be the dumbest person in the room so you can learn a lot from everyone else? Well, that was exactly the case here. These people were always like on the top 10, and I'd be in the top 10 of the complete opposite of the spectrum. So if you feel like you're not doing well enough, or if you feel like you're a failure, I'm not telling you to go out there and find the smartest group of people you know and just hope you eventually become like them. That might work, but honestly, I believe all you really need is a positive environment. Now, why do I say this? Because as people, we adapt to the different environments we're in, right? If you're placed in a dark and negative environment, you cannot expect to adopt any positive traits. For example, if you surround yourself with the smartest group of people you know, but they are condescending, they look down on you, and they don't think much of you, you won't grow. Most likely, you'll think less of yourself than before you started befriending these people. All right. So you guys now know that I was a terrible student at high school. So here's another one of my failures that for me is a highlight because I haven't told anyone about this until now. So when we were around grade 10 or 11, me and my friends had this research subject, and our teacher was saying that we were missing one of our requirements. And this was the requirement that I was supposed to have done. And my friends were defending me, and they were saying that I did do that requirement. But in my thoughts, I was thinking to myself, no, I didn't do that. And I remember how ashamed I felt at this time because my friends believed in me and I didn't do anything for them. But why am I telling you this? The reason is because my friends weren't just smart. They actually believed in me, even though they were always in the honor roll and there was no actual pressure for me to be smart. They just believed that I was capable of doing this or that in a group work, even though I did fail them at that one time. So maybe it wasn't such a good idea to trust me, but I made sure to never let them down again after that. Another example of how a positive environment can help it has recently happened to me. So a few weeks back, I couldn't even find the energy to talk to my family because I was really depressed. Right? They told me that they wanted to talk, so they sat me down and they talked to me about everything, and they told me the usual things that people would say when you're trying to comfort someone, like, "Oh, don't worry, you're good. Don't worry about this pandemic; it's out of our control." And honestly, it wasn't what they said that made me feel better. It was the fact that they cared enough to sit me down and talk to me in the first place. So I'm hoping that even though some of the points I'll be saying in this talk may seem a bit common sense, that just hearing the facts, just being reminded of these things, and knowing that you are capable of doing what you want will put you in a positive enough environment to bring about some changes. But going back to my previous point, in high school, I was someone who didn't believe in myself. I was someone who had already defined myself as a lazy and dumb person. But when I realized my friends believed in me, I found myself responding to that belief and decided I'm going to actually try to make myself better and not just complain about how hard it is to get good grades. So, next slide, please. So I realized that my mistake back in high school was that I defined myself. Why do I think this is a mistake? Because once you define who you are as a person, you are limiting your capabilities as a person. It's like you're putting yourself in this invisible box that limits who you think you're supposed to be as a person. I remember back when my dad and I were still arguing over my grades, he'd ask me, why can't you be more like him? Or why can't you be more like her? He or she gets good grades. And I would tell him, I can't do that. That's just not who I am. Getting line of 7 grades is all that I'm capable of. And the more I told myself that, the less effort I'd actually put into changing who I was. I accepted the fact that I was probably never going to be good in school. And this is the reason why I think you should never define yourself. And maybe you guys are thinking, what if I define myself with something positive? Like, I am someone who is always improving, I am someone who is always at the top. And that might be good for a while because it boosts your sense of self, it boosts your self confidence. But there will come a time where you stop improving. And there will come a time when you're not at the top. And someday you might find yourself saying, wait, this isn't who I'm supposed to be. And it's a terrible feeling overall to feel like you aren't yourself or you're not who you think you're supposed to be. Because when you move outside of that definition of yourself, especially one that sets high expectations, it feels like you've failed yourself. But as an individual, there is nothing out there that can define who you are. You can define a lot of things like pens, laptops, jobs, or even relationships. But to define yourself is impossible because there is so much about you that even you don't know yet. So, how can a few string of words encompass all that you are as a person? How can it tell the story of your failures, your successes, and all that you can be? It simply can't. So, do not try to define yourself because you'll only be placing yourself in a box that will constrain you. Instead, define your objectives and your goals. Figure out the steps you want to take to achieve your goals. Start defining what succeeding in those goals mean to you. The way I see it, people only ever say they're successful in life when they become extremely rich or have become well known. But it shouldn't have to be that way. If you define becoming successful as becoming a multimillionaire, then from now until you reach that goal, what would you be considering yourself as? You might see yourself as a failure, or you might just see yourself as someone who hasn't been successful. Right now, I can consider myself successful because who would have thought that a barely passing student would be here years later giving this talk? The way I applied this back then was when I was in high school, I wanted to eventually become the straight A student because I realized my parents didn't want me to have good grades because they wanted to say that their son is an honor student. They were probably just worried about my future. Probably. So my change from a barely passing student to the straight A student wasn't instantaneous, of course. So let me tell you how I did it. Next slide. So when I entered college, although my grades had improved at this point, my confidence wasn't exactly there yet. So throughout my college journey, faking it until I make it is all I've been doing, honestly. Even in this talk right now, I have no idea if any of you are actually listening or interested, but I'm still here and I'm giving my best. Most of the time, this works tremendously. The reason it works is because whenever there are exams or there are things that I want to achieve, I tell my friends, oh, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, even though in fact it's really difficult. But because I said that it's easy peasy, I don't want to look like an idiot once the results come out of whatever I said was easy. So there's this pressure on me that I've put on myself to actually succeed. And I'm going to work my hardest to actually succeed in that so that I don't look like someone who has no credibility in what he says. So the reason why this works is because even if you're kind of forcing yourself to have confidence in yourself, eventually some of it retains in you. Eventually your thoughts won't immediately go to think, oh, I cannot do this, to I could probably do this. It seems counterintuitive at first because you're faking something. But faking it until you make it is a whole lot better than just doing nothing or being too scared to do something and hoping for something to happen. Because at least when you're faking something, it means that you have a goal and that you want to achieve something. Although I will admit this won't always work. I have an experience with that, and it's very embarrassing, of course. Who wants to build themselves up and have it all crumble down in front of the people you showed off to, right? So, in our organization, we usually give an opportunity for officers to submit project proposals for our larger events. And usually these are in teams of four. And my team didn't really have as much confidence. So, I told them, don't worry, we're going to get this. We're going to get this. We'll get accepted. A large part of me didn't believe that. But of course, I had to fake it until we made it. Because if we were going to propose something that we didn't believe in, what was the point, right? So we made our proposal, and a few days later, of course, they tell us that we didn't get it. And of course, we were disappointed. But this was also a turning point in my college journey and in my journey in the organization as well. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that it was merely the experience of making a project proposal that made it all worth it. Because, truth be told, it was a lot of work to figure out the logistics of the event and work out everything that should happen in the event. But here's what made it worth it though. So, along with our proposal, we also had to show the executive board back then what the publicity materials would look like for the event. And we had to create the visuals for our event. The problem was, none of us in our team knew how to use Photoshop. And after a while, we could no longer just ask for help from others. So I made an effort to learn how to use Photoshop, and I played around with it a bit to create our final visuals for this event. And this brings me to another point I'd like to highlight. So let's move on to the next slide. It's extremely simple. It's simply making an effort. There will always be a reason to not do something, but I read this somewhere on the internet, and I'm not so sure if all of you are familiar with it, but it's called the butterfly effect. So the theory is that a simple flap of a butterfly's wings could in the future become the cause of a hurricane. Although this is extremely unlikely, the general concept is that something small can cause large changes in the future. So whenever I get demotivated and just overall feel like I don't want to do anything, I think of how making a simple effort from time to time can ultimately change a lot in my future. And I have experienced this. So to me, this was learning Photoshop back 2 or 3 years ago for our project proposal. So let's move on to the next slide. This is what we came up with in the final version of our visuals in the project proposal. It's not the best, but I was only starting to learn Photoshop, so forgive me. Now that I look at it, I'm not so sure what I made here, but I think it was the lanterns at the about bottom right and the lights at the top. But it was because of this that I was chosen to eventually become the team leader for the creatives of the event that was chosen instead of us. In the following year, I applied to become an officer for our organization again. And because the executive board saw my capabilities and creatives from this event, I was given the position of vice president for promotions. The next slide, please. So the vice president for promotions handled the publicity materials for our organization's Facebook page. And I learned so much in that year. I was able to make GIFs and tried out a lot more functions of Photoshop. And the year after that, I still applied to be an officer for our organization, and I was given the position that I have now, which now handles the overall branding of the organization as well as different partnerships. Now, if I hadn't made an effort to learn Photoshop back then, I might not be where I am in the organization now, and I probably wouldn't be giving this talk either. So next slide. Okay, So, although the future is difficult to predict, you never really know what will bring about better things for your life. It could be that studying for a few more minutes will make the difference between passing or failing a test. In my experience, making an effort to change eventually landed me here as someone who's now running for summa cum laude and someone who's able to use Photoshop proficiently. If you told me years ago that I'd be able to do that, I'd be telling you that doesn't sound like me. But what's great about making simple efforts is that it doesn't have to be this big grand effort. You just change is gradual, and making efforts doesn't have to be grand. It can be gradual as well. You shouldn't be making snap decisions to change either, because that is exactly why people fail their diets all the time. People see a new diet on the internet and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to start my keto diet tomorrow. I'm only going to start eating healthy foods and I'm only going to drink water. And then the very next day, they're going to see the food that they usually eat and they're going to think to themselves, hey, you know what? I'm the one who decides when I start my diet and I'm going to start tomorrow. So making sudden changes aren't as sustainable as gradual changes and making small efforts into these things. So I honestly think that if you want to succeed at anything, make small efforts into it because you can't expect success to jump into the palm of your hands just because you want it to. Now, some of you might say that there are people who are naturally smart or talented, that there are people who don't need to make an effort to achieve things. But this brings me to my next point. So let's move on to the next slide. Do not compare yourself to others. So you might say that they're naturally smart people because you've had these classmates who say, oh, I didn't study for the exam last night, and then they still get perfect in the exam the next day, right? Well, I'm going to let you guys in on a secret. Those guys are what you call liars. How do I know this? Because I'm one of them. Everyone aims to be the type of person who won't break a sweat in doing anything. I'll say, I didn't study last night because you know what? I studied at 3 a.m. and that was this morning, so it doesn't count. Or I listened to the professor enough to not study. My point here is, nobody is born with knowledge or skills. A child isn't just born with the knowledge of trigonometry or the ability to play the piano. We all start out the same, we're all blank slates, and we all have to make an effort at some point to learn new lessons or to learn new skills. Now, another reason why you shouldn't compare yourself to someone is because when you compare yourself to someone, most of the time you only ever know their successes. So to you, it seems like this person is great, this person has achieved so much because you see them at their best. But the moment you compare yourself to others, you've already placed yourself at a disadvantage because you've seen yourself at your best and at your worst. So it's not fair to compare yourself because you know everything good and bad about you while knowing only the goods in someone else. In my opinion, just continue living your lives, continue making efforts every day to be the type of person you want to be, and not just comparing yourself to someone who you think you should be like. You cannot improve yourself if your focus is on someone else entirely. So moving on, next slide. I've told you guys what I did to help me to become what I would consider as successful now. But despite everything, even if you follow all the advices on how to succeed out there, not just the ones that I gave, but the other ideals that you also personally have, you will at some point inevitably fail. And that's completely fine. Even though we know that failing is unavoidable, it doesn't make it any easier to experience this. And I'm going to admit it, as much as failing can help you learn new things, new skills, or new realizations, it still sucks. I still hate failing. But that doesn't mean I don't see the value in it. So I'd like to tell you what does make it easier to pick yourself back up when you failed. So as a student who's striving to be in the honor roll and as someone who is an executive vice president of our organization, I place a lot of pressure on myself. And whenever I feel like I've somehow failed, I take it quite hard. And what I notice is the first thing that failing does to me is damage my mental health. So the way I deal with negative emotions is by, next slide, please. So I accept my emotions. So I'd like to take this part of the talk to tackle a little bit on dealing with mental health problems. I am not a professional, of course. I only have the experiences that I've gone through. So especially now with how depressing the state of our country is, it really takes a toll on your mental health. And this, of course, applies to everyone. I mean, we are all human and we all have mental health problems one way or another, whether it's exhaustion, anxieties, depression. Of course, these emotions are not to be confused with clinical mental health problems. Those are different things entirely from what we usually feel. And I have no credibility in helping you guys solve those types of problems. So if you feel like you are clinically depressed, you should seek professional help. But what I do have is experience with dealing with the non-clinical depressions and anxieties. So when dealing with mental health problems, to me, it's best to acknowledge what you're feeling. And I just like to say that you should never have to invalidate your own feelings. Because I know some people get told by others that, hey, you know what, I'm sadder, or why are you sad? I failed too and I'm fine. But that doesn't make sense because we all have different standards of successes, we all have different standards of failures. We're all different people who perceive events differently, and that's completely fine. So whatever you're feeling when you've failed or when you're sad for no apparent reason, just write out that feeling you have and let it happen before you start moving on. So let's move on to the next thing that I do when I'm dealing with failure. Next slide, please. So I tell someone. The next thing would be to tell someone about it, of course, because the truth is, everything I've achieved today wasn't solely from my own individual efforts. I rely a lot on my friends and family. I've told you guys that I'm terrible at note taking, so I always tell myself I'll remember certain assignments, but I never really do. So instead, I ask my friends if we have anything due, and so far I haven't missed any major assignments. So relying on my friends has helped me to become where I am now. I mean, my CGPA is high, at least I consider it high. So in the same way that relying on others can help you succeed, it can also help you deal with failure. So the way I see it, if you fail and you try to deal with it yourself, you are isolating yourself and it becomes a whole lot harder to fight whatever negative feelings you have from failing. If you tell someone about it, though, you've already doubled the amount of people who are fighting your negative feelings with you. Now, I know it's extremely difficult to open up to someone out of the blue because it feels like you're bothering the person. I know it all too well because I would take weeks to open up sometimes. But eventually, when I'm ready, I'll talk to the people that I trust and I'm close with. And just knowing that I'm not alone with my struggles can really lift the burden off my shoulders. So in a nutshell, the same way that we rely on each other, you guys have to realize that we also need to rely on each other when we deal with failing. And so for my next slide, so this is the last point that I have for this talk and how to deal with failing. To me, just keep struggling. When it comes down to it, effort is what will move the wheels of your future and of your successes. Life will always be riddled with opportunities to fail, and it will always be difficult. But it is a privilege to be struggling against life. The way I see it, even though you failed at one point you had that opportunity to succeed, and not everybody gets that opportunity. We are only human, and we all stumble and get lost sometimes, but keep struggling because no success is worth anything if you didn't make an effort to achieve it. Some people will consider failure as a bad word. Some of you might picture sadness and rejection, but change your perception of that. It is nothing to be ashamed of because when it comes down to it, we have all failed and you are not alone. So I guess to end things in my presentation, just keep in mind to first put yourself in a positive environment. Because even if you have goals and objectives, without a proper support system or source of motivation, it's still difficult to grow. Make sure not to dictate who you are supposed to be, because I don't believe that there are limits to what a person can be, only limits to what they're willing to do. And if you find yourself unsure of what to do, just fake it until you make it. Because you never know how even making a simple effort into faking something can lead to great things in your future. When dealing with failing, make sure to accept your feelings and to accept your failures. These are all normal, and when you're ready to move on and to tell someone about it, make sure that you keep yourself in a good and positive environment, because even if you tell someone about it, you need someone who's trusted and someone who's completely open to you. And last, of course, continue struggling against life. Continue struggling against your failures. And eventually, I'm certain that all of us will succeed through the failures that we've experienced. And that is it for my talk. Yeah, thank you. Can't seem to hear you. I think you are muted, Mika.
Sorry. That was a
It's
really
fine.
good talk. I agree with all your points actually. They're very straightforward but very true, like the ones about not defining yourself, having a change in environment, not comparing yourself to others. Like it's easy to say, but I feel like not a lot of people can do that. Like it's something a lot of people still struggle with, even though it sounds pretty simple. So I
Yeah,
think now we can go on to our question and answer portion. So for the
all right.
first question, so for you, why is it okay to fail? How can a student or a young professional like us cope with failure?
Okay. I think the best answer to this because failing is normal. Failure isn't something that comes as a punishment for us. Failing is just something we as humans encounter a lot. Additionally, failure is a great teacher as well. You have to know what it feels like to be at your bottom, to have the drive to and motivation to get yourself back up. And when it comes to being a student or a young professional and coping with failure, in my opinion, it's also important to remember that the world will go on. Sometimes when we fail, it feels
Yeah.
like the world has stopped or time has stopped. And in that moment, it's just you and this ugly failure looking right at you in your face. But that's not the case. Eventually, the world will go on. Eventually, you'll pick yourself back up. And furthermore, I think it's very important to know failure while you're young, because it builds resilience. And when you have that type of resilience, when you grow, as you grow, I'm certain you'll do greater things. And I think just remember, if you fail today, don't give up on yourself, because you have so many more tomorrows where you can succeed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. I think people sometimes get so consumed thinking of their failures right now that they don't sometimes see the bigger picture or see it in the long run that your
Yeah.
failure today is really just a little stepping stone to success in the future. So that was a really good
Yeah.
answer. So my next question is, if someone that you know is struggling with failure but doesn't really know who to open up to first, whether they tell a friend or a family member, what would you tell that person? How do you think, or who do you think they should open up to?
Honestly, I think it varies from person to person, because some people are closer with their family and some people are closer with their friends. Like my family, I know that I can open up to them anytime and they willingly accept me. I know my friend, I can open up to my friends as well, but to some people, I guess it's all about gauging who they're more willing to trust. But I think for me, family tends to surprise you. Like, I didn't really expect for them to approach me and talk about the depressions that I'm feeling. They were the ones that approached me, and honestly, I didn't expect that because they were they're from a different generation and they're not as open to these mental health problems as the generation that we have now. So honestly, I think family will
Yeah.
understand you in some way. um, I know that there are some families that say, don't worry, you're just being sad, but they have a difficult time understanding. But I think the intention is there, the intention to help you feel better is there. So yeah, and honestly, that's what I get from my family. Their advices are things that I already know. It's just reminders for me, and it's really good to feel that they really do care about me. And I think from you'll get a lot of that from your families.
Thank you for that answer. That was a really insightful answer to the question. So for our next question, how can a person handle or manage their own failures or setbacks without letting the stress and anxiety get to them?
Mm, when handling stress and anxiety, I think it's important to look at the source. If you find out the source of your stress or anxiety, you can decide whether you can do something about it or not. If you can do something about it, then that's great. Make an effort in doing it so that you can relieve yourself of the stress. But if you can't do anything about the source of your stress and anxiety, I believe it's more important to just let it go and just let whatever about to happen happen. Because eventually, if you can't move on from this stress and anxiety that you're feeling, it makes you feel paralyzed. It makes you feel a little powerless because you have all this stress and anxiety, but you won't let it go, even if there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I think we should channel it into more productive
Yeah.
activities. Whenever we get stressed, and especially our generation, we tend to
Yeah.
procrastinate a lot, I think. So for my next
Yeah.
question,
Honestly, I do that as
we all
well.
know that. Yeah. No, sorry.
Oh, no, sorry.
So
It's fine.
we all know that uh, making comparisons is definitely something that a lot of people can't help but do, but it's really not
Mhm.
healthy. Like I personally know people who tell me that they do that, but they also try to stop it, but they can't. Since whenever you see people who are doing well, you wish that you were them, but you also try not to feel bad, but you end up feeling bad anyway. So how can you convince someone to stop comparing themselves to others and realize that it's not healthy to do that?
Hmm. I think for this, I've heard of some people who do this, like they go on social media detoxes, because I think a lot of the people that we see as successful come from like our social media feeds. Like, I mean, Elon Musk is now the richest person in the world. I mean, he's worth 180 billion. I mean, if I compared myself to that, I wouldn't consider
Yeah.
myself successful right now. And it's important to realize where you are at the stages of your life, because I mean, right now we're young, we have so much potential, and don't compare yourself to someone who's already in a different stage of their life of or someone who seems successful, because in social media everyone makes themselves look successful, right? No one wants to
Yeah,
post a picture of, hey, look, I failed at this thing, watch me fail at this thing. No one's gonna do that.
that's
So
true.
yeah, you should make cautions in comparing yourself to someone else, because it's really unhealthy, and it's better to just set goals that you want to be like this, but don't compare yourself. Oh, why can't I be her? Why can't I have this or that? You can just set goals that
Yeah,
I want to have this in the future and work towards that, not just like complain about it. Yeah.
yeah, that's good advice. So I think people would learn a lot from that, and not comparing themselves, because yeah, it can consume you. Especially being on social media and everyone being at home these days. I'm pretty sure for how many
Yes.
months people were just watching celebrities and idols, And yeah, that's so true. No one wants to post about their failures. So, syempre, when you go on social media and you see all these people, while it is motivating, sometimes you just end up feeling bad. But yeah, we shouldn't compare ourselves, definitely. So,
Yeah.
another question that I have is, how would you comfort a friend dealing with failure?
Hmm. I think it's important for someone who's dealing with failure to deal with it in their own ways. I mean, I have my own way of dealing with it, but I don't want to force it on someone else because to me, it's accepting my emotions and telling someone. But for someone else, it might be different entirely. Like they might say that it's just distracting myself until eventually the feelings numb out. So I think it's important to gauge how they want to be comforted. Like some people don't appreciate just like me. If I were to tell someone, hey, just tell me about all of your problems, it'll make you feel better because not everyone wants to talk about their problems, right? So I think it's about gauging what they want, what
Yeah.
they need. Yeah. And I think it's also about asking about how you can help that person as well. Yeah, I think it's better to come from the person itself than just trying to force your methods onto them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so for my next question, is failure tantamount to rejection or not? Please give us your thoughts.
When it comes to failure and rejection, I feel like there is some overlap between the two of them in the way that most rejections are failures, but not all failures are rejections. But the way I see it, these two things are kind of interchangeable as well. And they should be kind of treated the same. Even though there's a bit of difference, they should be treated the same way. Rejections are a normal part of life. And you shouldn't take it too hard because there's always a lot of opportunities out there. It's
Yeah,
not just this one big thing that you can make for the entire and for your entire life. There's a lot of opportunities out there only if you're willing to find them. So yeah, although there is some overlap in failure and rejection, it should be treated as the same way, wherein you don't take it too harshly and change your perception of rejection as well, that it is normal.
yeah. That's so true. Okay, so for my last question, if you had, if you could go back in time and talk to your past self that was struggling in high school, what would you tell your past self, not knowing that you would be the person that you are today?
That's an interesting question because I know how I was back in high school, and I know if I talk to myself, I probably wouldn't listen. Um, I'm not so sure, but maybe I tell myself to just keep believing in myself because honestly, at the time, I had no confidence in myself. It was extremely difficult for me to think that, oh, I could become an honor student in the future. So I think I just really lacked the belief of others in me and belief of myself in me. I mean, I knew my parents believed in me, but that's my parents. I was in my rebellious stage, so it was like I'm gonna go against everything they say. So like if they say I'm smart, I'm not smart. I don't care. Yeah, but yeah, that's it. I think that's what I would tell myself.
So that's something that I think all our past selves would love to learn from and hear. Not because definitely we're not the same people that we were years ago. And if we only knew that we would overcome everything that we have, then that would help us live life a little bit easier and not get so stressed in the moment and caught up in the moment. So one of the viewers has a question. Jake, do you have a podcast or a YouTube channel?
No, unfortunately, I do not have that. I'm sorry.
Maybe this is a sign you should start one.
I, maybe, in the future, I might make an effort. We'll see.
Yeah, actually, because like this topic alone is very, very informative. It's educational and very lighthearted, but it's straight to the point, and we can really learn a lot. So, Jake, thanks again for joining us today on this webinar. It was so insightful. I learned a lot from you. Is there anything that you would like to promote?
I guess it would be to promote student leadership. So as you guys know that I am an executive vice president for our organization, and there's really a lot that you can learn. So my organization is the Business Management Society. So when I joined this organization, I didn't have much confidence, and honestly, I didn't have the confidence to like approach people to befriend people. But when I took on more responsibility in joining this organization, I found my confidence to grow. So if you ever feel like you're kind of at a low, you might want to consider joining or just taking in more responsibility, because even though it might seem counterintuitive to take in more responsibility while you're feeling low, I think the fact that you're doing something voluntarily, something that you actually want to do, kind of helps to boost yourself, to give you more motivation, and the work ethic that you build in achieving what you chose is something that will be applied eventually to whatever future works that you have, such as academics. Yeah, I think that would be it.
So thank you, Jake, for sharing your time and the knowledge and experience with us today. We really learned a lot from you. So, for everyone who attended this webinar, you can all get a digital certificate of your attendance. Definitely, I'm sure you would want to get yours. If so, just head on to our website at www.esme.ph or click on the link that we posted in the comment section below. Make your own account and navigate to the title of the webinar that you joined in today. So, before this webinar comes to a close, I would like to invite everyone who wants to learn more and increase their knowledge and skills. Simply visit our website at www.esme or esme.ph. There, we offer a wide range of masterclass courses, those of which you can enroll in based on whatever is relevant to your passion, career, and interests. Again, thank you to Jake Ong for speaking about success through failure today. My name is Micaela Milian from ESME Philippines, and thank you for watching. Have a good night, everybody.